The Handkerchief by Great 78. Chapter 102. Potter, Python Poison, Papaya Paste, Poultices, and the 50-pence tour. "What do you think he's dreaming about, my? What the hell happened to the two of you in Godric's Hollow?" Draco asked. Hermione sat down wearily and watched him work. "It started out all right. We found James and Lily's graves, as well as that of Dumbledore's mother and sister. We even found a grave with that strange symbol on it, you know, the one I sent you a couple of weeks ago." "Right, so what happened? Where was the snake?" Draco reminded himself to mention finding the symbol in Skeeter's book later to her. Right now, there were more pressing matters. He created a small flame under the cauldron and added a bit of distilled water. "There was an old lady who was following us in the graveyard. She seemed quite creepy and maybe a bit senile, but Harry thought she seemed oddly familiar, if that makes any sense. She acted as though she knew us, almost as though she had been expecting us, even though we were polyjuiced. So she couldn't have recognized us, unless she was able to see through that. We followed her to her house." "Hermione, the A-team was very specific about this point. You never let anyone take you to a different location." Hermione interrupted him in disbelief. "How did you watch one episode of that program as a young child, and yet remember it so well?" "Never mind. You followed her, and then what happened?" Draco measured out the sheep's blood, using a pipette, and added it to the warm water in the cauldron. "She didn't speak. She kind of just shuffled and used hand gestures to communicate with us. She wanted Harry to go upstairs alone with her. Yes, I fully know the A-team's take on this," she said, at his look of barely controlled exasperation. He shook his head and kept his mouth shut. He summoned a knife and began peeling the papaya, carefully but quickly. "So I stayed downstairs and had a look around whilst they went upstairs. The place was creepy, Draco. I'm not talking like restricted section of the library or shrieking shack creepy." "Oh, yes, I'd forgot. You've been inside the shrieking shack. That's where Ted was hiding out before he had to go on the run," Draco said, slicing a piece of papaya into small slivers. "That was a good spot." "Sorry, continue," Draco said, turning the knife blade on its side to press upon the papaya slices, extracting their juices. "There was a copy of Skeeter's book. You know, Miss Bagshot was her inside source." "Right." "This copy of the book was dedicated to Miss Bagshot from Rita Skeeter herself, and it looked as though it had never even been opened. It was covered in dust. I was just opening it to look at it when I heard a lot of banging upstairs. I put the book in my bag. I could tell she wasn't going to read it. She seemed barely able to function, so I knew she wasn't going to sit down and read this book." "It was okay that you took the book, Hermione." Draco smiled reassuringly at her, knowing that she likely felt guilty about taking something that was not hers. She smiled gratefully at him. "So I hurried up the stairs to see what all the banging was about. It was rough going. The smell had been bad downstairs, but upstairs it was nearly unbearable. Oh, I forgot to tell you about the smell. Everything smelled like rotting—" At this, Hermione gagged and hurried from the room. Draco heard a toilet flush after a moment, then water running in another room. He thought about checking on her, but realized that she was likely fine, and that he needed to focus on this potion. He poured the juice from the papaya into the second cauldron on a medium-high heat, to reduce the juices to a paste. Hermione returned after a moment, looking rather red in the face and out of breath. "Sorry about that. I just had a realization about the smell. I thought it smelled like rotting meat, but I just put it together. It was... Oh my God, Draco! It was rotting human flesh." Draco felt his own stomach lurch, and fixed her with a look of incredulity. "What do you mean?" "We disapparated after everything, and as I was setting up the new wards here and getting the tent in order, Harry was mumbling the whole time. He kept saying things like, the snake was inside of her. She split open. The snake crawled out of her neck. Hermione said, aghast, I thought he was maybe dreaming, but now... Draco, do you think that actually happened? Because, if so, it might make sense. Bathilda Bagshot had not been alive in that house for a long time. There was dust on every surface, including all of the chairs and floors. Hermione dropped her head into her hands, pushing her sentient mane down between her knees. Draco was reminded of himself during his panic attacks the previous year. He rubbed between his shoulder blades with one hand as he stirred the papaya juices with the other. Oh my God, Draco! The woman had been dead weeks, maybe longer. I would bet anything that the snake was just waiting, biding its time, knowing that we were coming. The snake may have even killed her. At this, Hermione began sobbing uncontrollably. Hermione, love, please don't focus on this. Yes, it sounds like it was an awful thing, and you might be right, but Bathilda lived a long, happy, full life. She probably just died of natural causes. Draco felt that it was equally as likely that she died of natural causes as by a snake bite, but this did not seem to be the time to say such a thing. After a moment, Hermione's sobs subsided and she relaxed a bit under his touch. Okay, so you heard noises, and you ran upstairs, and you found the snake. Yes, and Harry. They were fighting. Well, the snake was wrapped around him. It looked like it was trying to squeeze the breath out of him. It was so frightening. Hermione took a deep breath. Draco felt his own chest constrict tightly at the description. I sent a few spells its way, and the snake released Harry. I could tell his arm was bleeding already. It already looked red and swollen. But he grabbed me and pulled me out of the way of the snake, put himself in front of me. Draco huffed a small sigh of relief. At least the git had done that. Sure, Potter had gotten them in that horrible situation, but it sounded as though he did what he could to protect her. Draco felt as though maybe Potter did deserve his potion. He smiled grimly to himself as he tested the papaya paste consistency. It was ready. I sent a few blasting curses at the snake, and several of them rebounded around the room. One of my spells broke, and at this, Hermione reached into her pocket and withdrew a wand, nearly broken into 2 pieces. Draco stilled, his eyes fixed on the broken twig in her hands. Whose wand is that? He breathed. It looked vaguely familiar, but he didn't instantly recognize it, so it wasn't Hermione's at least. Bagshot's. Potter's. It's Harry's, she said mournfully, and it was my spell that did it. The wand looked quite bedraggled and woebegone, a dark reddish-orange coloured feather core holding the 2 broken pieces together, but only barely. Did you try to repair it? He asked softly. He found the very idea of a broken wand slightly terrifying. It would be like suddenly and unexpectedly losing the ability to see or to walk. In spite of his general acrimony with Potter, part of him felt bad for the wizard. Draco turned swiftly back to the potion that he was working on, pushing the broken wand from his thoughts. This was the tricky part for the antivenom solution. Each drop of the sheep's blood solution had to be alternated with a drop of honey badger saliva. After 4 drops of each, the solution was stirred 7 times anti-clockwise. After another 8 drops, the mixture was stirred clockwise for 7 stirs. Then this entire process was repeated 7 more times. He and Hermione worked together, each taking a liquid and dropping the measured amount into the paste. Then Draco would stir, whilst Hermione counted with him. Once they had completed the process, a couple of minutes later, Draco set the timer for 6 minutes whilst the solution cooled, without being touched. Once it turned a vivid pink, it would be ready. As they waited, Hermione tried to repair Harry's wand with her own. It didn't work, so she tried it with Draco's wand, still with no success. She tried it with both wands together. Draco even tried it, but nothing seemed to work. the wand would reseal itself momentarily, but any simple spell they tried with the wand afterwards would result in it breaking again. The entire time Potter was restless in the next room. At times he was yelling incoherently, at other times thrashing about. The venom ordinarily would have killed him by now, but because it was just a glancing bite, and because Hermione had had the quick thought to put a stasis charm on his arm, it was moving more slowly than normal. But it was good that Hermione had contacted Draco so quickly. The stasis charm would not hold for long. She estimated that it had only been about 30 minutes since he'd been bitten. Once the solution was cooled, Hermione scooped it out carefully into a bowl, then pressed it gently onto the bite on Potter's arm. She packed it on as thickly as she could, then wrapped the entire arm in bandages. She poured a calming draught brought by Draco down Potter's throat, and the wizard calmed considerably, falling into what appeared to be a much more peaceful sleep. Draco followed Hermione back out into the main room, breathing a sigh of relief that the snake bite, at least, would not be a concern now. The wand they would figure out at another time. "Would you like the 50-pence tour?" she asked, giggling a bit. "What do you mean?" "Oh, sorry. It's just something my dad used to say in a joking way when new patients would come to the clinic. The children are often rather frightened. It's scary going to the dentist, you know?" Draco did not know, but he nodded along with her. Meeting Helen and Richard Granger had been rather scary for him, so it made sense that they would be a fearsome duo for young children as well. So he jokes with the children, "Let me give you the 50-pence tour." Then he takes them all around the offices, shows them how the chairs move up and down, how to squirt water with the little foot pedal, and where the prize chest is. By the end of the tour, most of the children are ready to become dentists themselves. Hermione smiled a bit sadly, and Draco ran his hands over her hair. "I know you miss them," he said. She breathed in, then, and out, very deeply. "It's okay. I have a job to do, and when I'm done, I'll get them back." "Well, how about that 50-pence tour, then?" Draco said, more to get her mind off of it. She smiled and held out her hand, standing. She gestured around at the drab, tan canvas walls. The space was about 15 feet square, and held a camp table and 3 chairs, a makeshift kitchenette, and a dumpy sofa in the corner. "This is where we take our tea, and this here is where we eat all of our meals. We also make the meals here. This is also the library, the entertainment room, the conservatory, the game room, the visiting parlour, and the exercise room." Draco smiled at her. "It's quite lovely. I adore what you've done with the place." She giggled. "You've seen the boys' room, of course," she said, then faltered. "Well, Harry's room." Draco grimaced, then made his best effort to turn it into a small smile. "Fucking Weasley. I take it you have your own private wing." "Yes, it's this way," she said, walking in the opposite corner from Harry's room and gesturing him inside. Here, in spite of the drab walls, a bit of his wit could be spotted. Pinned to the walls were a handful of photos, many of them muggle. Draco could tell because they didn't move. There were 2 or 3 of Helen and Richard with Hermione, another of her with Potter and Weasley, taken in much younger days. Additionally, there was a postcard from the Royal St. George golf course, and one from the water park and the amusement park that he and Hermione had visited in their summers together. Smiling shyly at him, Hermione withdrew her wand and touched it to the postcard from the Royal St. George. Instantly, the postcard transformed into a wizarding photograph. In the picture, he and Hermione sat next to each other, lit by a bonfire. Draco in the photograph looked at Hermione with such a look of longing and love, smiling openly at her, before looking down and touching her wrist where she wore her charm bracelet and carried her handkerchief. For her part, the Hermione in the photograph looked at Draco's face with such an open, trusting look of adoration. Her copper eyes and beautiful hair seemed to glow in the firelight, Draco thought, looking at the photo. May I duplicate this?" he breathed softly, touching his fingers lightly to the moving photo. Hermione nodded and watched as he did so. He tucked his own copy of the photograph into his pocket. "Colin took that photo of us that night of the scavenger hunt and the bonfire. He developed it the next morning and brought it to me. Other than the photos of my parents, it's my favourite possession here." "Come off it. I know you have your copy of Hogwarts history hidden away somewhere around here," he joked.
"The photo still ranks up there," Hermione murmured, rising on tiptoe to kiss him.
He didn't hesitate, but surged to kiss her back, taking her face in his hands and pulling her towards him as her hands came around his back and pushed under his jumper to find the warm skin underneath.
"Merlin, your hands are freezing, witch. Did you just dunk them in ice water?"
Draco groused as her cold fingers clung to his warm ribs greedily. She giggled as they fell to the bed.
"I'm surprised you're not used to living around cold things. Aren't you housemates with Lord
"No!" Draco screamed angrily. Then, seeing her scared expression, he exhaled and covered his face. "I'm so sorry to yell. It's just... the name is taboo."
"What?"
"The name. What you were about to say. Anyone who says the name essentially summons snatchers directly to them. It's how they've caught a lot of people. They figure anyone saying the name is working against him."
"Oh my God, that's... Oh, thank goodness we've stopped saying the name."
Hermione sat back in shock. "Please, don't pick the habit back up," Draco begged seriously. He ran his fingertips gently along the undersides of her ears and felt her shiver deliciously.
"Now who has ice-water fingers?" she asked,
grabbing at his hands. She smiled and leaned over to kiss him deeply. Draco opened his eyes to see his beautiful witch, lost in her magic, hair suffused with almost visible sparks. When she opened her lovely copper eyes, she looked at him with such longing, so much love, that he felt a surge of strength in his soul, in his magic. This, being with his witch, the woman he loved, this was what real magic was. He drew her closer, and she summoned the blanket wandlessly from the end of the bed to cover them. They lay there, held in each other's arms, their magic humming together in happiness. Chapter 103. Gifts, Wands, the Goyles, and the New Witch. It would be too easy to stay here, he thought. Surely they could explain everything to Potter. Harry Potter was a reasonable wizard, if a little obstinate and self-aggrandizing, and far too willing to spend time with the Dark Lord for Draco's liking. As if suddenly catching a brainwave, Hermione gasped.
"That's how they found us!"
"What?" Draco roused himself from his quickly devolving daydream in which Potter hexed him for using the last of the shampoo, whilst Hermione bickered with him for asking house elves to cook for them. He refocused on reality and the witch in his arms.
"Right after the ministry fell. I apparated us to Tottenham Court Road. We were in a cafe discussing what had happened, and I—"
She clapped a hand over her mouth.
"Oh God, I said it! I caused that! Yaxley and Rold showed up, we fought, and we obliviated them so they wouldn't remember finding us."
"I remember the two of them disapparating during the aftermath," Draco said, "when they were interviewing ministry employees." She looked up sharply at him, rightfully wondering what these interviews involved, but decided perhaps it was best not to ask. Instead, she mused,
"I wonder why the taboo didn't break when we were at Black House."
"Well, it's unplottable, isn't it? So there would be no way to find you. They might have been able to apparate to the general area, but they wouldn't have been able to find you specifically." Draco rubbed at the back of her arms, feeling her goosebumps rise at his touch. He could feel her nodding off after a moment, and as much as he wanted to stay, somehow he didn't think Potter would be pleased to find him here, in bed with Potter's best friend draped across his chest. "I can't stay. Potter will wake up soon enough, and if I'm not home on Christmas Day, it will raise questions," Draco said reluctantly.
Hermione gasped. "Christmas! Oh, Draco, I haven't gotten you a gift. It's been so...
My, don't be so daft. Being here with you, this was my gift, he said teasingly, squeezing her tightly. Any time spent with you is better than 1,000 presents. But... At this, he reached down and dug into the pockets of his joggers on the floor for the 2 gifts and the package of Christmas biscuits from Tiffy.
"Oh my goodness, Draco!"
she exclaimed. It struck him that this was their first time giving gifts in person. They'd never really spent time together on Christmas Day, and whilst they had seen each other on their birthdays because both days fell during the school year, they'd always celebrated separately. Their gifts had usually been delivered by Owl. She tore open the wrapping for the charm, smiling at the little broomstick.
"Quidditch pitch,"
he smirked, "to commemorate the first time we ever rode a broom together. That I will never forget. I'm still waiting for the next ride. Just say the word."
"Keep dreaming,"
Hermione said laughingly, as she threaded the new charm onto the bracelet, reattaching the bead on the end that held the charms in place.
"What's this? 2 gifts? No, 3.
The box is only Christmas biscuits from Tiffy.
Oh my goodness! I haven't had homemade biscuits in so long."
She dove into the box, exclaiming over the delicate curlicue confections. There were an even dozen, and she tried to give him 6, all but 1 of which he steadfastly refused. "Tiffy is making more of them, I will get my share tomorrow. These are for you." She looked down longingly at the last 5 in the box.
"I really should save some for Harry," she said. "I know he would enjoy them."
"And where, pray tell, will you tell him you found them? Is there a biscuit bush growing here in this forest that I don't know about?" Draco asked sardonically. She smiled devilishly at him, shades of her Slytherin side shining through.
"Right."
She ate 1 more, then closed the box and tucked the remaining 4 under her mattress.
"Maybe if we get to a grocery soon, I can get him a roll of chocolate digestives."
Draco shot her a look of slight disgust. "That sounds less like a treat and more like a remedy for stomach upset."
"That's just what they're called. They're biscuits," she laughed. "Don't knock them until you've tried them. They really are quite tasty."
"Okay," he smiled. "Last gift." He held out the scarf wrapped in green paper. She crinkled it a bit, able to tell that it was fabric inside.
"If there's lingerie in this, I should have opened this earlier."
"It's not, but I'll remember that for next Christmas," he hummed. She tore open the wrappings carefully, revealing the cream and plum cloth threaded with gold.
"Oh, Draco, it's beautiful," she said,
as she lifted it into her arms. The supple, rich fabric of the scarf flowed like water around her fingers. "It's imbued with an everlasting warming charm," he said, by way of explanation. "It'll keep your neck and shoulders warm in this freezing tent," he said, pulling the covers tighter. "Although I'm thinking I should have made it a full cloak. Merlin, it's chilly in here."
"I love it, Draco. It's gorgeous and brilliant. Thank you."
She kissed him deeply, longingly. He knew that it was time to leave. He was sure that she knew it as well, but neither of them wanted to move, just yet. It was too easy, just lying here, shutting out the world. For just a moment they could pretend that their classmate wasn't 40 feet away, recovering from a venomous snake bite. For just a moment there wasn't a war, a villain, people being hunted and dying. But every day they had to make the choice between what was right and what was easy, and ignoring it for more than just a brief interlude simply wasn't possible. He stood and dressed reluctantly whilst she sat on the bed and did the same. Occasionally their eyes met, silver touching copper, and they smiled together at the domesticity of it all. Back out in the cold snow, a warming charm trying and failing to keep them comfortable, Draco took out his wand and pressed it into her hand. "You need to take this."
"What? I am absolutely not taking that. You need that."
Hermione's eyes flashed in disbelief at him. Draco sighed. He knew that this argument was coming as soon as the idea had occurred to him an hour before, but her needs outweighed his at the moment. "The 2 of you are out here in the open, defenseless.
Merlin, if the wrong person stumbles upon you, we have wards in place, and they're excellent. But what happens when one of you needs to go out for a minute, and Harry has used my wand, it works for him all right. And you've used my wand. It works perfectly for you. You need 2 wands, Hermione. The Malfoy and Black family vaults have old ones. I can get one from an ancestor. Plenty of witches and wizards do that." She sighed, pressing the wand back to his chest. "You and I both know that your wand is different. It isn't one of those wands. Those wands don't reflect who you are, and they never could. We will be fine. Harry and I are always together, and, let's be honest, we were raised by muggles." She smiled to herself. "If it comes to it, Harry and I know how to fight." "Well, you do throw a mean slap," he chuckled. "It was almost a punch," she said swattishly. "It almost felt like one," he said amicably. They laughed, and he tilted his head to slant his lips over hers. "I love you. Merry Christmas, bye." "I love you. Be safe in that place." "You as well," he said, looking back at the tiny tent. "Please, keep your wards strong. Send me a message once you're back inside the tent and protected." "You send me one when you're back home." Draco smiled wistfully. "I won't be back home until I'm with you again." The wind seemed to still. Her breath, which had been coming out in white puffs of air, paused. Then she rushed to kiss him, squeezing her arms around him, tears in the corner of her beautiful copper eyes. They finally broke their kiss, and he stepped back, and before either of them could change their minds, turned on the spot and vanished. The next morning his bed was laden with various gifts from his parents and Pym, Theo and Blaise. He spent a bit of time looking through The Story of Success, a Falmouth Falcons retrospective, from his friends. He hoped that when all of this was done, the 3 of them could enjoy a match together. He showed the birds their fancy new toys for their cage, from Pym, then tried on the winter coat from his parents. He was surprised to see that it was from a muggle shop. He wondered when his mother had gone to get this, running his hand over the almost silken-feeling wool. Dinner was as unpleasant as he had expected. In addition to the Dark Lord and his usual compatriots, Draco also had to endure the company of the Carrow siblings, the elder Nott and his current wife, and Selwyn, who was alone since Aradia had left him. The Goyle family was also in attendance, much to Draco's intense displeasure. Greg kept asking to go up to Draco's room, mainly to escape his younger siblings. The 2 boys were second years at Hogwarts, and both were quite bratty. They seemed to feed off of each other with noise, escalating every discussion into an inane argument between themselves. The only thing that shut them up was food, and it seemed that there could never be enough of that for them. If there was a moment of hesitation between one course finishing and another arriving, the din from their end of the banquet table reached thunderous proportions. Draco did not wish to have Greg in his personal space, knowing that there were a handful of things that were clearly of Muggle origin in his room. His new coat, for one, not to mention his Game Boy. Draco was not sure who Bellatrix was using for her intelligence on him during his time at Hogwarts, but he could not rule Greg out. Instead, the 4 boys played 2-a-side Quidditch after lunch, where at least Draco did not have to listen to Thomas and Edgar whinge about food. When everyone finally departed around 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Christmas Day, the 2 young boys with small hampers of food to sustain them until the dinner hour, Draco excused himself to his room to rest a bit. He took out his handkerchief and spoke the password, "Vinca Major." "How is Potter today?" The reply came about 15 minutes later, just as he was thinking about putting down his book to rest. "He's better, awake and alert. I think he's worried about things he saw and dreamed about when he was out, and he's quite upset about his wand, but I think he understands." "He is your friend, Hermione. I think just the fact that you didn't run away like the weasel gives him some idea of your loyalty. He knows you didn't intend to break it." "Do you know is Mr. Ollivander still at your house? Do you think you could ask him if it's possible to repair a broken wand? Perhaps he has some ideas that we didn't think about." A chill swept through Draco. God, Ollivander. He hadn't thought about the poor man in months. Surely he'd been released. But he knew in his heart of hearts that that wasn't likely. The old man, my God, if he was still alive, the old man had to have been going spare down there, alone. Then a worse thought occurred to Draco. What if he hadn't been alone? What if more prisoners had come? Or what if Ollivander wasn't there anymore? Who could he even ask? Would his mother know what had happened to him? He wrote back quickly to her. "I will let you know what I find out." Pym. The small elf appeared with a small crack. "Is Mr. Ollivander still in the dungeons?"
"Yes, Master Draco. Pym visits him daily. Pym makes sure that he has good food and a comfortable bed to rest upon. I have been doing the same for the young new witch. Is that all right?"
A wave of nausea took over Draco. "There's a new witch," he whispered. Thank you for listening to this chapter of The Handkerchief by Great 78.